This is Cast of Wonders, the young adult fiction podcast featuring stories of the fantastic. Welcome. Episode 595. I'm Catherine Inskip, your editor and host. Today, Cast of Wonders is bringing you another Summer Spotlight episode, part of our series featuring award-nominated authors and stories. This week, we have a work by one of the nominees for the Astounding Award for Best New Writer. This year's nominees are Mona Quill Blackgoose, Sun Yi Dean, Ai Zhang, Hannah Kaner, M. X. Liu, and Qiranjie Zhao, all of whom are very well worth reading. But our story for today is Come In Children by Ai Zhang, which was first published in Hexagon Magazine issue 10 in September 2022. Ai Zhang is a Chinese-Canadian writer, Ignite Award winner, Hugo, Astounding, Nebula, Locus, Bram Stoker and BFSA award finalist, and an immigrant from Fujian currently residing in Toronto, Ontario. Her work can be found in fantasy and science fiction, the dark and uncanny, among others. She is the recipient of Odyssey Workshop's 2022 Fresh Voices Scholarship and the author of Ling Hun and I Am AI. Find her on X, Instagram and online on her website. This story is narrated by Melissa Wren. Melissa Wren is a Chinese-Canadian writer whose narratives tend to explore the intersection between belonging and becoming. She is a prize recipient of Room Magazine's Fiction Contest, a grant recipient of the Canada Council for the Arts, and an editor at Augur Magazine and Tales and Feathers. Her writing has appeared or is forthcoming in Factor 4 Magazine, Fusion Fragment, Dreamforge Magazine, and elsewhere. Find her at linktree/Melissa Wren or follow at Melifsfluus on socials. And now, we've a tale to tell.
Come In Children by Ai Zhang, narrated by Melissa Wren. Ye Jin rubbed her eyes. A cyst was growing at the edge of her right lid. She didn't have to feel this terrible, but ever since she'd stopped draining the youth of lost children who wandered into the forest, the wrinkles had settled in. Her brown hair streaked with gray, and her teeth had become brittle, sensitive to bruise both too hot and too cold. She hated lukewarm tree sap water, but it would have to do. When a knock on her door came, Ye Jin fumbled for her glasses on the nightstand next to her bed. The old crow that lived in the large oak with its branches draped over her mushroom-shaped house hadn't yet called. It was far too early for the beginning of her business hours. The rapping against her creaking wooden door quickened, staccato and urgent, but Ye Jin's movements remained slow, steady, and calm, as though she were in a trance. At least it wasn't a smartphone. Technology she could never understand the appeal. The quietness of the forest was much more desirable than the roar of the city. She refused to use the internet, though she snuck into the city every decade or so, just to peek at the state of the world. More often than not, it was a mistake. People were foolish, brutish, short-sighted, and utterly helpless on their own. But she had renounced the world and did not intend to return, no matter how clearly they required her services. They'd have to come seek her out for it, and there would be a price. There always is. Ye Jin slipped her feet into the wool slippers she'd made last winter. It had only been 2 seasons, but they were already scruffy. She loathed having to trudge to the city for more yarn. When she had been young, she had hunted the deer of the forest and made her clothing from their hides. Sometimes she'd found joy in making the deer forget. Pause, so she could pounce while they were confused. But it seemed rather depressing now, a blank stare, a blank mind, confusion before death. Sometimes it wasn't dear. The rapping, having paused only for a breath, resumed. I'm coming, Ye Jin muttered under her breath, knowing her brittle voice wouldn't carry down the stairs and through the doors anyhow. She'd have to renovate the house to get rid of the stairs soon, at the rate her centuries were catching up to her. It took ages to walk up and down. Ye Jin grabbed her cane and took sideways steps down the stairs. The clacking of her cane echoed in her ear. Instead of opening the door, she first cleared her throat, then flipped the sign next to the window so it showed open in Gothic script. Only when the sign stopped clattering against the glass of the window pane did she grasp the bronze doorknob, shaped like a shriveled head, and twisted. On the other side of the door stood a man in a pressed suit with the tie wind-blown. Sweat had soaked through his white shirt at the armpits, dampening the navy fabric of his suit jacket. His leather dress shoes were speckled with mud and grass. "You are Ye Jin?" he asked. Ye Jin nodded. "Yes." Before the man spoke another word, Ye Jin waved him inside, leading him to the kitchen without sparing another glance. She settled down at the dining table in the middle of the kitchen. Only one other chair remained empty across from her. The man took the seat, pulling out an embroidered handkerchief to dab at his neck, his veins bulging beneath glistening sweat. Ye Jin wasted no time. "What do you want erased?" She wiped fog from her glasses. "My father," he answered, the handkerchief now soiled, clutched between the nails that were in desperate need of trimming. "Not just a single memory? His entire existence in your life?" Ye Jin's brow rose. "Yes. Please." The desperation in the man's voice dissipated her hesitance. Memory charms were difficult, and the mind will attempt to hold on to the most impactful experiences and recollections with greater urgency. But this one would pay the steep price, and swiftly, by the sound of it. Ye Jin hummed, then nodded. "There will be a hefty price. Do you understand? And you may feel an emptiness where the memory used to be and confusion if you attempt to recollect what was erased. Sometimes you might feel lost and wonder why you desire that which you never had, but the pain will help you grow past it." He nodded. "And the payment?" 5 years of your life and all memory of me." For a being with less power, it would have been a discount price, but Ye Jin was a refined master of the art of memory manipulation, and she did feel momentary compassion for the sweaty oaf. The second part of the agreement was more of a guarantee that he would not come looking for Ye Jin again when the side effects knocked on his door. His hands clenched into fists cradled in his lap, fingers still fiddling with the handkerchief, fraying its edges. "All right." Ye Jin's gaze lingered on the man's balding head before she picked up her cane and headed towards the cupboards. From the highest cupboard, Ye Jin removed a jar of aged scrolls on the verge of molding. She unscrewed the lid and handed the man inked-marked parchment. "Take this with you and follow the instructions exactly." The instructions were from her great-grandmother's period, and Ye Jin had yet to update them, but it should be simple enough. People never really changed, even as they continued inventing new ways to make loud noises and flashing lights. "Rid your home of all images of your father. Your family and relatives will still remember him, unfortunately, so you may need to ensure they don't mention him around you, or you may get confused and attempt recollection. Perhaps best to avoid them as well." The man nodded. "When you've followed all the instructions, return here and bring the scroll. I'll take half of the payment now, and the other half when the charm is complete," Ye Jin said. The man looked as though he wanted to argue, but thought better of it. Ye Jin placed both of her hands on top of the table, palms facing upwards, and beckoned the man to place his hands in hers. As soon as their flesh connected, she felt energy draining from his body, enter through her fingertips, running through her veins, the same time his spasmed, squirmed like worms in boiling water. The man's head snapped back, gurgling with his mouth stretched wide in a silent wail. His legs trembled, an earthquake shaking through him, yet his feet stayed planted on the floorboards. Ye Jin cackled, marveling the whites of the man's eyes, slivers of red crawling up, up, looking as though they may burst. Her customer was suffering, experiencing a taste of momentary death, but Ye Jin felt alive. 5 years from this worn-out carcass of a man was nothing, like a single sip of cold tea compared to burning, sweet youth of lost children. But she had sworn off children when her youngest sister left to have her own with a mortal man. Not that Ke Yi had ever appreciated Ye Jin's sacrifices and left Ye Jin's heartfelt advice lingering in the air with covered ears. Why did Ke Yi insist on nurturing a child in her own womb when she could simply keep one of the children who wandered into the woods? Their woods. Now it was only Ye Jin's alone. So much power Ke Yi had given up. Such a pity, the fool. She'd learn the folly of her ways soon enough. To be enticed by a mere mortal man, what was she thinking? She wasn't, surely. And the live children? One's own children? Those uncontrolled things? They were a headache and a trial at best. Must Ke Yi be so blind when her elder sister was trying to help her see? An assertive knock on the door jostled both Ye Jin and the man from their brief, strange moment of intimacy. The man's pupils were again in sight, though they lulled side to side, unfocused, eyelids shuddering. With the payment transferred, a few more age lines appeared on the man's face, and a few of Ye Jin's receded. The man withdrew his hands, closing his fingers instead around the scroll in front of him. Ye Jin paused. 2 customers within a week was nearly a flood, but in a single day? That was unheard of, at least not since the 1800s. And this knock was no timid, hapless seeker of curses or erasures. "Sister!" came the voice on the other side of the door. Ye Jin's lips drew in on themselves, forming a thin line. Webbed wrinkles crawled up the sides of her mouth, spreading across the entirety of her face and blending with the purple and green veins beneath the translucent, papery skin of her neck. Neither Ye Jin nor the man closed the door, so she could see her sister's figure lingering by the opening from where she sat in the kitchen. "Ke Yi," Ye Jin said. "I told you. It's Penny," Ke Yi said as she pushed inside and past her elder sister. She was still in her 30s, her actual 3rd decade. Draining youth was still an unnecessary thing for Ke Yi, and she insisted she never would, though Ye Jin knew her sister would change her mind once the end of her mortal lifespan approached. Ke Yi would feel far worse than Ye Jin did now. The centuries between the generations the sisters were born in had caused more of a gap than their mother expected. Not that the ancient sorceress had cared much before she perished. "My apologies, Penny." Ye Jin could taste the copper in her mouth. She liked her sister's birth name better, but there was no sense in starting that argument again. Ye Jin stood, leaving the man who had taken an interest in skimming the instructions. "What brings you here?" She looked past her sister at the trees that swallowed what would have been a view of the city behind them. The forest would have been swallowed by the expanding edge of civilization, if not for Ye Jin's persistent efforts, though that had drastically reduced her number of customers. Ke Yi narrowed her eyes and crossed her arms, fingers curling into fists at the end of her elbows. She'd lost weight. "My husband? You took away my husband!" Ye Jin cursed under her breath, but bent her face into a disarming smile, flashing the gap of her missing front tooth in hopes her sister might realize what she would become by straying away from draining children's youth. "Would you like to come in and have some tea first? It'll only be a second. I can get the pot going now." Ye Jin took a slight turn towards the kitchen and tapped her cane against the wooden floor. For a moment, Ke Yi's anger seemed to dissipate as her arms fell slack by her side. Her eyes roamed Ye Jin's face, no doubt noticing the age. The last time Ke Yi had seen Ye Jin was a decade ago, when she first left the cottage, their shared home, back when she had first met the man who would become her husband. But back then, Ye Jin had still looked to be in her early 40s. Now maybe it was somewhere closer to 70, or so mortal age went. There was a squeak as a chair slid back from the kitchen table. "I should," the man began. "Yes," both women replied simultaneously. "In 3 days," Ye Jin said as the man straightened his tie and rushed to leave. "Looks like business is still booming, huh?" Ke Yi sneered, wrinkling her nose as she took the spot the man vacated. Ye Jin pulled out a rusting kettle and lit a fire under it. "You'll feel better with some proper tea. Better than human food," Ye Jin drawled, despite the lingering flavor of sap on her lips. "That's only because you haven't tasted the restaurants in the city yet," Ke Yi rolled her eyes. No need. There was a brief silence. My husband. Ke Yi repeated the words she said when she first entered the house, scraping her nails against the chipped oak table. The wood flakes loosened and embedded themselves into Ke Yi's finger, but she took no notice. You erased him. Yes, but you requested it. Don't you remember? Ye Jin kept her expression neutral, but her heart pounded within her. Would her sister catch the blatant lie? You'd said you'd finally grew tired of him. He wasn't so great after all. It's just as I have always said. Ke Yi laughed, high-pitched and slightly deranged. She tossed her head back, arching her spine, resembling the man earlier. I requested it? We both know that's impossible. You wanted it. Ke Yi's expression darkened as she looked at Ye Jin, baring her teeth. Ye Jin had once thought her sister would grow out of her chaotic teenage years, but the wildness within her, though tempered by age, sometimes slipped momentarily, causing dark episodes. Ye Jin abandoned her lie. You belong here, with me. The kettle screeched as the water came to a boil. The scent of metal and steam filled the air, almost like sizzling blood. Why did all of our sisters leave then? Ke Yi prodded. Ye Jin did not reply as she put out the flame beneath the kettle. She settled back in the seat across from her sister after filling 2 deer skull mugs with steaming oak root tea. She slid the cracked one across the table, keeping the good one for herself. I just want to be happy, Ye Jin. Not that you ever knew or will know what that means. Ke Yi spat in the tea, then left it untouched, glaring in disgust at the whittled skull by her hands. Where did you hide his photos? How do you remember him? Ye Jin asked, knuckles turning white as she gripped her mug, the heat singeing her skin. Ke Yi pulled out a phone. The lock screen displayed an image of her and her husband arm in arm. Just because you broke the old one doesn't mean all the data is lost. But you wouldn't know that having been out here for so long. So, you're back together then? Ye Jin asked, attempting to be nonchalant. Ke Yi's face twisted and she turned to the side. He's dead. Ye Jin's nail dug into her mug until a crack appeared, until it grew. Steaming liquid leaked onto the table, through its crevices, cooking her flesh. She raised the mug, allowing the tea to roll down her arms, leaving angry red welts. Behind the skull, she tried to conceal her grin. How? She asked, standing up. I didn't recognize him when he came into the house, so I hit him over the head. A little too hard, it seems. Ke Yi seemed too calm, but Ye Jin only thought of how to keep her sister from imprisonment. Perfect! You can hide here! Ye Jin said, but Ke Yi shook her head. I need to get rid of the body first, and I'll need your help. Ye Jin's blood chilled at the thought of going into the city. All the vehicles and the unnatural sounds. But her sister, she had to help her sister. Ke Yi finally understood where she belonged. She was coming home. Ye Jin found herself nodding. Ye Jin failed to notice the clear exterior differences between her and Ke Yi until they stood at the edge of the forest, where Ke Yi donned a peach cashmere sweater and jeans. Ye Jin wore a long, plain gray dress with a brown cloak drawn over top. Ye Jin looked over her shoulder, but could not catch a glimpse of her home, the shriveled mushroom top on the verge of collapse, but never actually collapsing, the withered flowers that were very much living, and the gates made up of the skulls of both humans and animals. The city was full of life. Death comforted her. By the road that passed closest to the edge of the forest, Ke Yi had parked her small blue car. Ye Jin eyed it with caution as her sister hopped into the front. Would you rather walk instead? Ke Yi huffed in impatience. I could conjure us the legs of the crow for the stretch of our journey. Ke Yi frowned. We're not doing that. A low grumble left Ye-Chin's lips as she climbed into the passenger side. She shuddered, along with the engine as it started. Before they arrived at Ke-Yi's house, only half an hour away, Ye-Chin had thrown up a handful of times. Sometimes on the side of the road if Ke-Yi pulled over in time, but more often, it was on Ye-Jin's wool shoes. By the time they reached Ke-Yi's condo, the entire car smelt of oak root tea. Ye-Jin covered her ears as they headed into the condo. The sound of a train running against its tracks boomed far too close to where the sisters stood. A car rolled past the front of the building, blaring its horn for what felt like the entirety of the Middle Ages. In the visitors' parking lot, a car alarm went off. Even the sound of chirping birds along the humming power lines annoyed Ye-Jin, a sound that would usually be calming in the forest. It was noisier than Ye-Jin remembered it being when she had snuck into Ke-Yi's apartment the first time to get rid of traces of her husband. It had been a futile attempt, but she had to try anyhow. Her sister felt more distant with each passing year, and she hadn't realized the disillusionment of humanity quick enough for Ye-Jin's liking. Ye-Jin was growing tired of feeding on the stale years of overstressed and anxious businessmen and women, young adults going through an existential crisis, and avoiding the lost children who still stumbled upon her house every year. She needed a proper meal, but she couldn't risk harming one of her own nieces or nephews, assuming Ke-Yi produced one or several. When Ke-Yi opened the front door, Ye-Jin spotted a puddle of blood that looked too bright, soaked into an off-white faux fur carpet. In the middle of the pool sat a small wind-up duck. Blood splattered around it. From the corner of her eye, Ye-Jin noticed a shadow darting towards her. It wasn't until her hands were bound behind her, when her cane had clattered onto the floor, that she realized it was Ke-Yi's husband, Hunter, alive. "Goodbye, sister." Ke-Yi smiled and clenched Ye-Jin's hand in her own, causing a protesting speech to escape her elder sister's throat. "Ke-Yi!" "My name," she said, "is Penny." Ke-Yi's nails, like a crow's claws, drew blood from Ye-Jin's wrinkled webbed palms. Ye-Jin's eyes rolled back arched, and convulsed against the cage Hunter created around her with his arms. Ye-Jin's eyes refocused. There was oak root tea in a deer skull mug on her nightstand. She didn't remember brewing it. She took a sip. It was cold. A small cloud of strange froth floated on the golden-brown liquid surface. The tea leaves at the bottom stirred, fluttering, as she placed the mug down. There was a knock on the door. Ye-Jin moved to stand, wondering who it could be when her business hours hadn't yet begun. But she noticed an odd glow outside the window. The sun was setting rather than rising. A panic rose within her as she took unsteady steps, her joints feeling stiffer than they had the day before. She stumbled forth, swaying. A jolt shot through her hips. Her eyes widened at her aged hands, ancient compared to the youth she remembered she had from what felt like only minutes before. Never had her lips felt so dried, cracked. A burning thirst ravaged her from within. How long had it been since she tasted the rejuvenating taste of youth? What had happened the day before? There was a man, the one who wanted to forget this father, but that couldn't possibly be all she had done that day. "Excuse me?" came the voice of a woman. Ye-Jin hobbled towards the door. The closed sign was already flipped to open. "Yes, yes." She stared as though someone might materialize if she looked hard enough, but no one was there. On the doormat outside the entrance lay a rolled-up scroll, but unlike her molding parchments, the material of this paper was bone white, except for where it met the dirt that had collected on the mat. There were no instructions within, only a small completion symbol sat in its center. Who did it belong to? Perhaps one of her sisters who might have passed through? No matter. She was far too tired to deal with this. It was intolerable, being weak and elderly. Her fingers brushed across the smooth, unnatural surface of the parchment. It was better to burn it than to leave it laying around. If another sorceress tampered with it, who knew what chaos they'd brew up? Ye Jin shuffled toward the kitchen after taking one last look around her home, narrowing her eyes at the trees. After starting a fire for her dreadful sap tea, she fed the flames with the scroll, watching the white sheet curl and turn into ashes beneath her kettle. The fog she woke up with earlier began to settle as the remainder of the scroll left her fingertips. When the kettle screamed for attention, there was another knock on her door. The man. Ye Jin sighed. Why was everyone be so keen to forget those bound to them by blood? Ye Jin flipped the open sign so it showed closed and waited until the clattering of the wooden sign against the glass stopped before she left the window side. Mama? Outside, a young child wandered in the forest, lost. A lucky day for Ye Jin. She prodded her legs with her cane. How long had it been since the last child? She furrowed her brow. Why had she stopped? Ye Jin made her way out of her cottage as the child neared her gates, seeming unfazed by the skull and bones that made up its entirety. Mama? The child asked, frowning. Who are you? The child had a face like someone Ye Jin should know, but could not remember. But maybe, if she kept the child, just for a while, and stared hard enough, she would recall the person she had forgotten. She had told someone it was all right to take these lost children into her home for as long as they wished, hadn't she? The fog rose again like a veil in her mind. It required energy Ye Jin didn't have to draw back its curtain. Perhaps she would have the power after she was done with the child. She nodded, refocusing on the child who stood with sharp clarity in front of her, an entity of endless youth. Ye Jin smiled, feeling wind chill the flesh around the gap between two teeth. When did that appear? It would be gone soon, anyhow. It's quite cold outside. Would you like to come in and have some tea first? It'll only be a second, and then we could go search for your mama together. Surely the child wouldn't catch her blatant lie, would she?
This story is deliciously creepy, isn't it? But aside from being a great read, it's also an interesting exploration of different routes to immortality, through the genetic heritage of our family lines, through the extension of one's life, and through the memories of others. Alongside that, we see how death is always the flip side of that coin. I like that Ye Jin's craft is centred on memory erasure, and how every aspect of her magic disrupts those different kinds of immortality. She extends her life at the expense of the lives of others. She takes the lives of children, disrupting whole family lines, and she acts as an agent to destroy memories, killing the forgotten person's legacy in a different way. By the end of the story, her own memory is stolen. Her sister has escaped her at last, but the Ye Jin who is learning to not be quite so abhorrent is also lost. She goes back to her old ways, not living, either as a mortal or an immortal, but rather frozen as the worst of her past. Join us again soon. We love bringing you the best audio fiction week after week, but we can't do it without your support. Your donations pay our authors, our narrators, our servers, and our staff. Please consider supporting us with a monthly donation through either PayPal or Patreon. You can also review us on Apple Podcasts, request us on Spotify, and consider the stories we publish for award consideration. There are lots of ways you can help. Join the discussion on the EA Discord and visit us on social media at Cast of Wonders on X and Blue Sky. Come say hello. Cast of Wonders is brought to you by editor Catherine Inskip, assistant editors Cup Jacob and Alicia Caparaso, associate editors Rebecca Arn, Tanya Adelit, Amy Brennan, Somtua Haseway, Becca Miles, Ray O, Samuel Poots, Pooja Prakabaran, Emma Smales, Denise Sudell and Rin Yi. Our editorial assistant is Amy Brennan, our community manager is Denise Sudell, and our audio producer is Jeremy Carter. Cast of Wonders is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. That means you can download or listen to the episode on any device you like, but you can't change it or sell it. Our theme music is Appeal to Heavens by Alexei Nov, available from Promo DJ or his Facebook page. Thank you for listening.